Where exactly is Newtrogic High Zone? You know Newtrogic High Zone, right? Well, what about the real-world equivalent of Flicky Island or Never Lake and the Little Planet? What if this Green Hill Zone isn't the one you think it is? And what if I told you that Russia on Sonic's planet is basically one big toy box? The world of Sonic the Hedgehog is a confusing and chaotic mess that has played fast and loose, no pun intended, with not only its canon, but also its planet. So we took it upon ourselves to map out Sonic the Hedgehog's entire world. I did this a while back with Mario as well. That video saw a staggering amount of support, so thank you so much for that. It really means a lot. But like with that project, we gotta lay some ground rules down first. Rule 1, canon? What canon? The Sonic series has always had a confusing sense of what's real and what's not. Well, none of it's real, but you know what I mean. Things have been retconned and reset again and again, and there's a ton of different alternate universes like the Archie comics or Sonic X. Luckily, or maybe not luckily, I don't know, it depends how you look at it, Ian Flynn, the current writer of the Sonic games and IDW comics, has been fairly vocal about letting us know what's canon and what isn't by today's standards, so we're going by the most up-to-date information that we could find on what counts here. Rule 2. Some things Hedgehog was not meant to know. Partly because of the aforementioned retcons and partly because these are video games, some things here are impossible to determine and just directly contradict each other, meaning we have to just make a decision we feel is best. Doesn't mean the other interpretations are any less valid. These games were not designed to be mapped into a cohesive world like this. This is all for fun. Please try to remember that. Healthy debate is absolutely encouraged, but some people got a little too passionate over the Mario map, you know what I'm saying?
Peace and love, peace and love.
Rule 3. If you don't hear about it, it's because it doesn't matter. Something I think I could have done a much better job of clarifying last time is that if I don't mention a certain game or location, it's because it doesn't necessarily need mapping. Like Wario Master of Disguise was one I saw mentioned a few times on the Mario video. That game takes place in Wario's TV, guys. I'm not putting Wario's TV on the map. Super Mario RPG was another one I got a lot of comments about. Given that that game contains the Mushroom Kingdom and pretty much everywhere else around it is kind of landlocked to it, I considered most of the game to take place there, hence why it wasn't explicitly mentioned. If it's even canon at all, I mean, it is a Square title after all. But yeah, I get why that was confusing, so if a stage or game isn't mentioned here, just know it was considered. It just wasn't worth mapping because it either wasn't noteworthy enough or placing it down would be a complete stab in the dark based on absolutely nothing, and where's the fun in that? We're also not mapping out any flying fortresses, space stations, or pop-up Eggman bases that he builds for one game and then abandons because they aren't really part of the planet or long-standing landmarks like cities. Most of them end up blown up or dismantled by Sonic and therefore aren't really there anymore. Exceptions to this rule will be bases that have super clear geographical locations or bases so big that they constitute a whole area like Scrap Brain Zone, and they must be on the planet. So Egg Fleet, Final Fortress, the Ark, the Death Egg, Wing Fortress, Egg Rocket, etc. They're not being mapped, they're not part of the planet. Now, without further ado, let us begin with... Okay, yeah, so actually the first thing we have to do here is decide which version of Sonic's planet we're even using. What do I mean by that? Well, there are at least 3 instances we found of Sonic's planet looking completely different in the games. Now, Sonic Unleashed, I think we can throw out right away. It's from a time where Sega was showing little to no interest in continuity, and much like the worldview in Odyssey, serves a practical gameplay purpose, so accuracy isn't really the focus here. The other 2 come from Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic Riders respectively. Sonic Riders depicts Earth 1-to-1 with our own, so this strikes me more as a quick stock image that was created for the asset, and therefore I think Shadow is the most likely to be canon here. Sega, it seems to have become much more attentive to the series as canon in recent years, so something more recent would be ideal, but between the 2 imperfect choices of Unleashed era and Shadow era, one of those shows a bit more interest in continuity, and it's definitely not Unleashed. Shadow's version is also depicted as a sort of alternate Earth, which to me feels like how Sonic's planet was meant to be interpreted anyway. At one point, it was canon that there was 2 worlds being jumped between, a Mobius-like world filled with Sonic-like animal people, and a human planet that was just regular people, but that got retconned a while ago. So we'll be using this as our base, but there's definitely more to it than what you can see here, believe me. Now, let us begin with what you might dub the Adventure Turf. The United Federation is basically Sonic's stand-in for the United States, and as such is probably comprised of roughly this area here. Only North America is kind of flipped horizontally. I think it's fair to say that most of Sonic's adventures take place around the continents that are adjacent to North and South America here. Sonic has no issue globetrotting, but many of the reoccurring side characters like Amy, Biggs, or the Chaotix aren't likely to be moving across the globe super frequently, so for them to keep showing up, the games have to be mostly taking place on the same part of the planet. Not all of them though, don't worry. Sonic's versions of Europe, Asia, and Africa will definitely be getting plenty of love later on. The most notable place here is of course Central City. Central City is a major location in the Sonic franchise, being used in a number of titles in the early 2000s especially. Not only is it the capital city of the United Federation, but it's also one of the primary settings of Sonic Adventure 2, as well as showing up in Sonic Battle and Shadow the Hedgehog. Central City bears a striking resemblance to San Francisco, and the state of California in general, which again, working off of a flipped North America theory, puts it around here. Sonic Battle shows us Night Babylon, a kind of nightlife district that exists in Central City, so we know that to be somewhere in the general area, with Emerald Town existing to the west of Central City in Sonic Battle. Crucially though, Emerald Town must be on a coast, so that probably puts it somewhere along here. I mean, they said it was to the west, they never said how close, and Sonic and Friends run pretty fast. They probably could run across a few states in an afternoon, it's not a big deal for them. Emerald Town is probably kinda near Westopolis actually, which I would guess based on its name is in fact a western city. One we know is definitely in the United Federation, given Gun's presence in Shadow the Hedgehog. Actually, let's take a brief detour and talk about Gun, shall we? Gun stands for the Guardian Unit of Nations, and they're the US military, plain and simple. Like all governments worth their salt, they've participated in their fair share of shady practices, tried to build weapons of mass destruction, attempted to control power they didn't understand, and covered up a child shooting here and there. Going into the deeper lore of the franchise is something we don't really have time for in this video, it's pretty long as it is, but if that's something you might want to see, then let us know. We are no stranger to talking about Sonic lore on this channel. Sunset City is another place in United Federation territory, despite what their lack of presence in Sonic Forces might imply. How do we know this? Well, because according to Ian Flynn, the IDW comics are in fact canon. This doesn't cause many problems actually, the IDW comics do a pretty good job of respecting the game's history, and because most of the Sonic games are self-contained, it's pretty easy to believe some adventures Sonic simply has off screen and you just don't hear about them in the games. Also, like there's this line in Frontiers.
I'm a tangle with love climbing around these ruins.
They're definitely canon. Anyway, Sunset City is said to be to the south of Central City, so I'm putting it down here at the bottom of the North United Federation border, since Sunset City also seems to be coastal. There's this island to the right here that I've placed down as Prison Island based on a couple of different things. Firstly, I think putting Central City and a San Francisco adjacent position on a flipped world map and having it be right near this island is a very happy coincidence. Sonic Adventure 2 was already a thing when this map got made, so maybe this was intentional. I doubt it, but we can hope. There's also the obvious parallel to Alcatraz, it's right near a San Francisco inspired city. I think this is probably Prison Island. There's also this little island next to it, which I have a fun little theory about. So in Sonic Adventure 2, we see this island off the coast of Central City and kind of near Prison Island as well, which, as anyone who's got all 180 emblems in Sonic Adventure 2 will know, is in fact Green Hill, a 3D recreation of the first act of Sonic 1 on the Genesis. The thing is, level design aside, I don't think this is South Island. For one, South Island exists in the South Sea, and this island is just above the equator. But also, as we'll get to later, South Island is home to a lot of biomes and locations that just don't make this work for me. No, instead, I'd like to propose that what we're seeing here is actually Neo Green Hill from Sonic Advance, or New Green Hill Zone. I think this is kind of a New Mexico or New England situation, maybe when the more anthropomorphic animal-like civilizations started to move to the more human-inhabited areas of the planet. Neo Green Hill acted as somewhere where they imprinted their own culture. I don't think this is a massive leap either, given that Neo Green Hill does have human civilization elements to it, such as this big red bridge that the boss fight takes place on. Not unlike the red bridges and highway scene in Central City, by the way. I also kind of like the idea of this being the location of Sunset Hill and Sunset Forest, respectively. Both Green Hill-esque areas that are distinctly different from the original and would also therefore be in close proximity to Sunset City, making this kind of the Sunset region almost. Back to Prison Island though. I know the landmass here might look kind of big for Prison Island, but it's worth noting that there is a pretty massive jungle here. I think it's probably bigger than it's made to look on the SAT map screen. Whilst I think this map is good for giving us a rough idea of how things look, I don't consider it to be accurate in its scale or relativity, and this is honestly going to be my attitude towards most world maps from this period in Sonic history. Whilst I'm willing to put more weight into maps shown in games like Origins because they come from a time where Sega was starting to kind of put more effort into tidying up the canon, and they don't serve a gameplay purpose, SA2's map is a little harder for me because it comes from a time when Sonic as a series was just starting to establish a canon, and it does in fact serve a practical function, so obviously they're not drawing this thing to scale. Anyway, Green Forest and Metal Harbor are of course here somewhere, roughly where it shows them on the SA2 map. Again, just probably not to scale. I won't be mapping out individual stages really, like White Jungle and Weapons Bed, since they're the same general locations, just under different names. I do think Green and White Cave from Riders also happen here though. They share a naming convention with Sonic and Shadow's versions of their respective stages here, and they look fairly similar. Not too far north from Central City and Prison Island, we have what we're dubbing the Pumpkin Hill region. This works pretty well here in my opinion. Once again, using flipped map theory, it puts it roughly where Arizona would be, along with the Grand Canyon. The Rail Canyon is also likely in this area, since that stage shares an aesthetic with Pumpkin Hill and Sky Rail, even having some pumpkin-shaped rock heads. Frontier Canyon also likely exists around here. Arizona was one of the states classified as being part of the Wild West, which means it's not too far-fetched to stick around this area. Although I guess on Sonic's planet it was the Wild East. Not as catchy though, is it? Maybe the Epic East? Nah, that sounds like a Fortnite POI. Anyway, we also have Casino Park and Neon Palace around where Vegas would be for obvious reasons. Casino Park is mentioned to be a casino-themed city, which sounds like Vegas to me. We also have Rocky Ridge residing around this area as well. Pinning down an exact area is pretty difficult, but definitely in one of those Epic East states for sure. Empire City is a fairly one-to-one New York stand-in, which we can place around here. And I think you can add Route 99 to this area somewhere, since the skyline is based on Manhattan. Pre-9/11, mind you, you can see the North Tower in the back here, even though Sonic Advance 3 released in 2004, so did Sonic stop 9/11? Oh my god. Anyway, let's get out of furry America for a bit and look at Hedgehog Canada, shall we? Presumably not under the control of the United Federation, but still on the continent of North America is Sonic's version of Canada. Starting us off, it's somewhat implied that Frog Forest isn't all that far from Rail Canyon, and given its mountainous background, I could see this being north of Rail Canyon and fitting in with a Canadian landscape. Iron Jungle is likely in this area as well, though I suspect part of it extended into United Federation's territory, given that Gunn has deployed agents here. We also elected to put some of the spookier locations from Sonic's planet in Canada, and let me explain why. So I'll start with Cryptic Castle. Cryptic Castle is one of the very few locations in Shadow the Hedgehog to have zero gun presence, and given that there is both Black Arms and Eggman factions here, maybe that's because they simply don't have the jurisdiction. The second reason is something you might have noticed already, but as we go further north on the continent, the animal to human ratio is becoming more and more skewed in favor of animals, and that's because I have an insane crackpot theory that a fair amount of modern Sonic's non-human adventures do in fact take place in Canada. Sonic Canada anyway, hear me out. In French Canadian folklore, there is a higher than normal presence of werewolves and other shape-shifting sorcerers that used to turn into animals. Now, I'm not saying that that makes Canadians a bunch of furries, but it does fit oddly well together with the idea that heavily human inhabited areas could be so close to others that feel so much more natural and Sonic-y, for a lack of a better term. Perhaps this region is mostly descended from similar shapeshifters who chose to live mostly in the form of animals. Absolutely not Sega's intention, but it's a fun little thing to think about. I kind of like it. Anyway, Catholic demons are also very commonplace in French Canadian mythology, and Canada is home to a good amount of castles, so I think Cryptic Castle and the visually very similar Hang Castle and Mystic Haunts feel at home here. I also think this might be where the events of Sonic Advance 2 take place. If you flip this bit of the map upside down, it sort of matches up here, but more noteworthy than that, it's a region where we could realistically see a snow-covered city, vast mountains, and a forest, conveniently tiled Leaf Forest, just saying, all within close proximity to each other. Obviously, this puts Music Plant and Techno Base close by as well, no real issues with that. The only weird one is Hut Crater, which, like, again, Rule 2, it's a video game world, wasn't meant to make geographical sense, so you're gonna have these weird pocket biomes like like this here and there. There's also the argument that Hot Crater is simply a man-made invention by Dr. Eggman, and I wouldn't say that's super far-fetched. I also think Cybertruck from Advanced 3 likely takes place on the same landmass as Technobase. Advanced 3 story sees you jumping across the planet, so each zone really could be anywhere, and these two areas are incredibly similar. Leaf Storm from Sonic Rush I think could arguably take place here as well as Night Carnival. Leaf Storm obviously shares a naming convention and aesthetic with Leaf Forest, and also the fact Cream and Vanilla presumably live nearby both. We already see the house in Rush, and in Advance 2, Cream is looking for Vanilla around Leaf Forest first, so it must be pretty close by. The IDW comics also show Vanilla's house as being in a village named Floral Forest Village. Night Carnival must be nearby, since Cream runs into Blaze pretty early into her story, and Night Carnival is Blaze's first stage. I want to clarify, I'm going by factors like Cream's relative closeness to these areas, coupled with the fact that she's usually unlikely to rush away far from home, and not the in-game map. Again, I think this is one with a practical function, and it's probably not drawn to scale. Rush as a whole, I do think takes place over several continents, but we'll get to that later. Lastly, we have this little island up here, which we believe to be Monopole, a small island group that makes up the central location of Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, and also likely the home of Metal City from Sonic Riders 1. It's described as the city of the future. There's a lot of focus on clean energy and not a ton of human presence here, so Canada territory feels like a good fit. Canada are a pretty damn green country in terms of their clean energy, and places like the Botanical Kingdom and Aquatic Capital could absolutely exist here. Aquatic Capital makes sense because Canada has a high emphasis on hydroelectricity, and the Botanical Kingdom exists inside a kind of microclimate dome, so it doesn't really matter where it is, to be honest. This could also plant Grand Metropolis just off the shore. It's another city with a focus on clean energy, at least that's what the city's energy supply Hexaco says. It's apparently a usually pretty great place to live, only really briefly being under Eggman's control during the events of Heroes. Station Square and Mystic Ruins are major locations in Sonic Adventure, serving as the game's hub worlds. Mystic Ruins has to exist in relatively close proximity to Station Square since they're accessed via train, but they don't have to be super close. I mean, trains can travel pretty far. And if you want to be super picky and technical here, the fact that both train stations' announcements list Station Square and Mystic Ruins respectively as the destinations indicates that they're both at the far end of this particular train line.
The train headed for Station Square will be departing soon.
Due to the fact that Station Square is a coastal city with relatively close proximity to mountains, jungles, and ruins that feel very Mayan in nature, I feel confident saying Station Square falls around Central or South America. We're going to go more south in this case simply because Central America doesn't really exist on Sonic's world map. Which specific city is hard to say. It doesn't have as many glaring parallels as Central City does to San Francisco, but Rio is a pretty good fit, I think. It's coastal but still a busy, bustling city. There's a lot of nearby mountains and greenery, and it would be much more on the eastern side of this continent, which puts Mystic Ruins over here where Peru would be. Again, Mayan-like temples would normally indicate Mexico, but I don't know, man, Mexico just isn't really here in Sonic's world. I think Peru is probably the next best parallel for Mystic Ruins, since it also has to be relatively close, and it puts it near the Amazon rainforest, which again I think is thematically fairly spot on. Station Square is obviously very close to the Emerald Coastline, with Speed Highway existing either within the city itself or maybe leading away from it somewhere else. I think Sonic Force's Mystic Jungle likely acts as Sonic's stand-in for the Amazon rainforest, and probably borders or is in fact the name of the larger area containing the Mystic Ruins. They share a name and aesthetic after all, with ancient ruins being commonplace in both. This also puts the Lost World Temple and Windy Valley in this area, as well as, in my opinion, Splash Canyon from Sonic Riders. This is purely a visual thing, but I don't know, man, this course just looks identical to Mystic Ruins to me. I think it makes a lot of sense here, especially since Riders 1 is meant to be a World Grand Prix. I think that would probably mean the tracks are fairly spread out. Glyphic Canyon and Death Ruins from Shallow also feel pretty at home here. More ruins and jungle aesthetic in an area that's under United Federation rule. It just all kind of makes sense. I also think Forgotten Tomb from Free Riders exists here. That track has a very Mayan aesthetic as well. And Radical Sea from Sonic R likely rests down here somewhere, given the mountainous surroundings. And finally, we have Sand Hill. This desert area is accessed through the Mystic Ruins, meaning it's likely close by, but if I'm being completely honest, it is accessed through a weird sinkhole, so this one's not an exact science. I mean, none of this is, but this one especially. Now, we know that the famous Angel Island exists in close proximity to the Mystic Ruins because the damn thing crashes there in Sonic Adventure, so let's say we go there next. Angel Island is the central location of Sonic 3, and Knuckles, can't forget him. One of the more lore-heavy areas on Sonic's planet for sure is the resting place of the Master Emerald and by extension, the 7 Chaos Emeralds, the former of which is looked over by its guardian, Knuckles the Echidna. We now know from this official Sonic timeline that the Chaos Emeralds were actually brought to this planet by the Ancients from Sonic Frontiers, more on that later, and originally held in the Mystic Ruins before the Echidnas stole them and the Master Emerald for their own gain. This could imply Angel Island didn't always float, only doing so after the theft took place and the emeralds were moved to the island. The island floats up high in the sky most time nowadays, but if the Master Emerald is removed from the altar, it will come crashing down to sea level where it floats until the emerald is restored. The Master Emerald contains one particularly relevant ancient Chaos. Originally, Chaos was a mutated Chao who had become an immortal being, but Frontiers seems to suggest that Chaos is actually just how the Ancients used to look before they began to evolve into Chaos over the centuries. Chaos would protect the newly evolved Chao from harm and watch over both the Master Emerald and Chaos Emeralds for a long time until the Knuckles clan attacked them in hopes of claiming the emeralds for themselves, as I mentioned earlier. This turns Chaos from a peaceful guardian into the god of destruction he would later become known as in legend. Before further bloodshed can take place, Cole, the clan chief's granddaughter, seals both herself and Chaos inside the Master Emerald, where they both stay until the events of Sonic Adventure. Not many games see us returning to Angel Island, so this one's pretty straightforward, especially thanks to the Sonic Origins map screen. Now, this is a map that, as I mentioned, I'm willing to put some more faith into for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as I mentioned at the start of this video, Origins released around the time Sega was trying to clear up their canon and lore, and secondly, the South Island map here is pretty one-to-one consistent with the one shown in Sonic 1 Game Gear. So if they're trying to stay consistent with that, I think we can assume that they're staying pretty consistent with the rest of the islands here too. Lastly, I think it does make sense for the classic games locations to all be within close proximity to each other, as this map screen shows them. The Death Egg has to land on Angel Island, so Sonic 2 and 3 have to happen close by, for example. The map also takes care to have South and West Side Island off to the south and west respectively, so I do think this is a map we can somewhat trust. With that in mind, right off the bat we have Ice Cap in the mountains here, Carnival Night over to the right, Marble Garden in the center here, Mushroom Hill just below it, Sandopolis to the middle on the island's south side, and Launch Base in this sort of basin area here. These distinctive trees down here I'm sure are meant to be the shores of Angel Island where you arrive in Sonic 3. This zone is also called Angel Island Zone, so for the sake of avoiding confusion, I'm going to refer to this as the Angel Island Coast. We also have Lava Reef, which almost certainly takes place in these mountains. The interior is extremely rocky and this central mountain looks like a volcano to me. This also puts Hidden Palace in the base of this mountain somewhere. Totally different Hidden Palace from Sonic 2, by the way. Hydro City resides under Angel Island. The stage transition makes this pretty clear. Obviously, it's important to note that despite being underwater, this zone must actually be within the rocky underside of Angel Island and not in the actual ocean, because obviously this island is usually floating, and when we return here in Sonic Mania or Knuckles' story, the zone is still submerged in water, so it's not like this was a result of the island plummeting or anything. The two-player zones I think can be nailed down fairly easily. Balloon Park probably sits near Carnival Night. Desert Palace is likely in the Sandopolis region. Chrome Gadget is likely an extension of Launch Base, and I think thematically it makes sense if this lake leading from Marble Garden is the Azure Lake. Endless Mine is a little more difficult to nail down, but it's likely in the mountain range somewhere. Now, Angel Island does appear in a few other games, but usually you only really see the Emerald Altar, or you see a drastically different version of it, like in Sonic Advance. Sonic Team are very inconsistent with how the Emerald Altar and the island in general looks. For the most part, I'm going to be ignoring different interpretations of it, like in Sonic Battle, since they're assumed to be the same place, just portrayed differently from an artistic standpoint. Like when Spider-Man nerds argue about which suit looks better, but it's all the same suit, it's just drawn by a different artist. Anyway, I think Angel Island in Sonic Advance is likely a retread of Marble Garden. The aesthetic and backdrop are very similar, it's just referred to as Angel Island here because it's the only stage in the game to take place on the island. Like, you can go to Trafalgar Square and it would still be accurate to say you're going to London, you know. Chaos Angel from Advance 3 is described as a floating piece of the planet created from Eggman blowing it up with a Chaos Emerald, and also as one of the many ruins around Angel Island. I interpret this as being sort of several ruins from around the island all kind of blown into the air and mashed into one zone, so I don't know where I'd map it exactly. I think it probably behaves similarly to Sky Sanctuary in that it's above Angel Island and kind of floats around it, as evidenced by the fact Angel Island can be seen in the background of the Mecha Sonic fight during Knuckles' story, after the island is already back in the air where it should be. Sonic Adventure does see us go back to Angel Island when it crashes into the Mystic Ruin shoreline. We revisit Ice Cap as well as a new location, Red Mountain. I'm pretty sure this is the exterior of the mountain where Lava Reef is set. I even kind of headcanon the Red Mountain Act 2 is part of Lava Reef. That just makes sense to me. And finally, we have one of at least 2 Emerald Altars around the island. The other is in Hidden Palace. In reality, there's probably a fair few of these dotted about, given that we've seen multiple altars that can harness the Master Emerald and other titles. Oh, and there's also the Sandopolis tracks from Team Sonic Racing. They all take place here. They're explicitly stated to be in Sandopolis. This does also imply that there's some relation between the Boom Boos and the ghost from Sonic 3. The little planet is best known as the setting of Sonic CD. It's a tiny floating planet that appears above Sonic's planet over Never Lake for a full month once a year. Pinning down where this is isn't as difficult as you might think. See, the little planet is very visible from Lava Reef Zone in Sonic Mania, and if you're playing the Japanese version of Sonic Adventure, there's a kid in Station Square who will say to Sonic, "Oh, it's Sonic, I know you. It was Sonic who saved the world during the Little Planet incident and the Angel Island incident." That's my best kid impression, what do you think? Now, we know Angel Island is pretty damn close to the South United Nations, and we can infer from this that Sonic's adventure in Sonic 3 and CD were both things Station Square residents heard about. This, combined with the Lava Reef view in Mania and its positioning on the Origins VAT screen, seems to heavily indicate that Never Lake is just north of Angel Island, which puts it roughly at the bottom of the North United Federation. Bless up 90s Sega, because they were pretty good at giving us really good looks at maps in the games, and most of these are fairly obvious. You have to use your imagination a little here and there though, so let me walk you through it. Palm Tree Panic, I think, is likely in this section up here. Got visible palm trees and a lot of greenery, so it might also extend to this island over here, I'm not sure about that. The crystal rocks here certainly represent Quartz Quadrant. I think that's pretty safe to say. This big Eggman statue appears in Stardust Speedway, so that cements that as being down here pretty well. I think this big city area here is likely Collision Chaos. I've seen some people argue that it's Metallic Madness and that this is Collision Chaos, but it makes more sense to me that the Eggman built factory is the smaller island mass in the center, both because it's more fun thematically to have the final zone be in the center like that, but also because surely Eggman's factory isn't like 3 times the size of a city, right? Also, this part has some colorful buildings and trees here and there, so I'd say Collision Chaos personally, with this wobbly green building being Wacky Workbench. Finally, we have tidal tempests around these mountains and these pillars coming out of the water. It's also worth noting that Titanic Monarch from Sonic Mania also takes place on Little Planet. We see the player characters jump from the planet and watch as it explodes in the game's ending. And the zone is also accessed from Metallic Madness, meaning it's probably very close to it, maybe even stationed in the same place, which makes the most sense to me. Eggman Island is a dinky little rock and the setting of Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, an arcade exclusive title with the rare playable trio of Sonic, Mighty and Ray. Once again, the in-game map gives us a really solid idea of where every zone is located on the island, so there's not a ton to discuss. The island itself we've placed next to Never Lake due to the very similar Eggman mountain face and the fact that the island is shown to connect to another piece of land. This also puts it in close proximity to the other classic games, which feels very cohesive. Off to the west of all this is Flicky Island. Flicky Island, sometimes known as Flicky's Island, is the setting of Sonic 3D Blast, sometimes known as Sonic 3D Flicky's Island, sometimes known as Sonic 3D Blast Flicky's Island. Del that? Good. Another super easy one, the world map in-game just lays out exactly where everything is, and Origins reflects this, so not much up for debate here. This place is noteworthy for being home to the Flickies, these guys. They might just look like birds, but did you know they're actually from another dimension, where they're just birds from another dimension. Cool. As far as I can tell, it's never implied that they're any more effective at powering up Eggman's machines than other animals. It's just that he thinks he can use the dimensional ring portals on Flicky Island to perform an infinite XP glitch and just keep farming Flickies. Flicky Island was also apparently formed when the legendary continent of Atlantis rose from the depths and I guess just became Flicky's Island. The instruction book cites the Rusty Ruin Zone as being a testament to this origin. Now this actually has a super cool real world parallel I want to talk about for a sec. See, there's this species of bird known as the inaccessible island rail. It's the world's smallest flightless bird and can be found exclusively on an inaccessible island in the Tristan Archipelago, which is located in the isolated South Atlantic. It was first formally described by a physician known as Percy Lau in 1923, and for just under 100 years, the bird's origins were a total mystery. No one could figure out what relative the species had evolved from, leading Lau to conclude that the birds colonized the island by simply walking there on connected land masses which had been consumed by the ocean. This ended up being proven false in 2018 when, using modern DNA sequencing, it was found that the ancestors of the inaccessible island rail simply flew there and just evolved to stop flying because there's no predators on the island. It's all chill vibes. Now, I don't know about you, but Lau's original theory sure sounds similar to the idea that the island is a floating remnant of what is now an underwater continent, just like Atlantis. What's more, a mysterious isolated island that is home to a mysterious bird species that seems to be coming out of nowhere, or in this case another dimension, could definitely be an accurate description of Flicky Island. Anyway, since we're already close by, let's stop flying around it and just cover the Blue Blur's hometown, shall we? South Island is the central location of Sonic the Hedgehog, the Bluebird's first solo title. Not his debut title, however, that was as an air freshener. But did you also know it is the central setting of like almost every other fucking game in the classic era, according to the instruction manuals? This island also sees the events of Sonic 1 Game Gear, Sonic 2 Game Gear, Sonic Chaos, Sonic Triple Trouble, and Sonic Blast unfold here, as well as Sonic Labyrinth. As such, South Island is home to a host of different biomes, far beyond what we see in Sonic 1 on the Genesis. As I touched on earlier, Sonic 1 Game Gear gives us our best look at the island's layout, a layout which again is very closely reflected by the map's 3D model in Sonic Origins. Using these, we can pretty safely pin down the locations of almost every zone from Sonic 1 Game Gear and Genesis. Green Hill Bridge Zone, Marble Zone, Jungle Zone, and Scrap Brain can all be placed without much debate here. Labyrinth is a bit of a weird one because Origins shows it down here near Green Hill, while Sonic 1 Game Gear shows it up in the mountains. I think in reality, Labyrinth probably runs all over South Island and acts as a sort of underground for the entire place, with entrances in multiple places. This would make the fact it's shown in two spots here consistent with the fact the zone is near Scrap Brain Zone as well as close to Starlight, and even Green Hill if you go by the original level order. Spring Yard is a little more up for debate, but Origins does show it close to the mountains in the center, which makes sense given the mountains shown in Spring Yard's background. I do think it probably stretches across the length of this strip here, given it's an industrial looking city area, and probably is more to the left than center, given that this is where jungle from Sonic 1 Game Gear is shown to be on the map screen in that game, and by this oddly distinct jungle looking bushy foliage on the Origins menu screen. Starlight in my mind has to exist on the other side of these mountains because it's not visible on this screen and it doesn't appear in Sonic 1 Game Gear. Now how about we take a look at some of those other Game Gear titles and populate South Island some more, shall we? Sonic Chaos introduces us to Turquoise Hill, an area that is visually similar to Green Hill and surrounded by a lot of water. It's therefore likely pretty close to Green Hill, maybe a little closer to the water. Makes sense considering Turquoise is halfway between Green and Blue. Gigapolis is a bright city environment, so it likely lives pretty close to Starlight Zone. Sleeping Egg is a flying island above South Island, which is also a dream. Little unclear what's going on there, but either way, I don't think it belongs on this map. Mecha Green Hill is stated to just be a transformed version of Green Hill from Sonic 1, so this is literally the same place, just under Eggman rule. And Aqua Planet takes place in an alternate dimension, apparently. So, yeah, I don't know what the fuck was happening in Sonic Chaos, but that's not going on the map. Sonic Triple Trouble's first zone, Great Turquoise, is described as being on a southern island and shares a visual aesthetic with Green Hill and part of the name of Turquoise Hill, so I feel confident saying that this game also takes place here. All the others seem to, so, you know. Anyway, Great Turquoise is likely pretty close to, if not part of Turquoise Hill, right? Similar backgrounds, visuals, similar name, has to be. Sunset Park is described as an abandoned amusement park, which I think likely plants it between Spring Yard, another amusement-heavy location, and Green or Turquoise Hill, maybe with the train line in Sunset Park connecting them. Meta Junglorilla is probably just near Jungle Zone, maybe even the exact same place. South Island has a lot of biomes squeezed in there, so I doubt there's more than one deep jungle completely separate from the other. Tidal Plant is an underwater area that's a bit more industrial in nature than Labyrinth, so I think this is likely off the shores of Spring Yard Zone, and close to what I'm dubbing the urban area of South Island up here. This also puts it by Robotnik Winter, the zone that comes before it in Triple Trouble. It's worth noting that this zone is described as an island of eternal summer that Eggman has turned into ice, My theory is that the island of Eternal Summer in question probably just is South Island. South Island is very rarely shown to have weather other than sunny skies. I think only once ever do you see it raining, so it could definitely fit that bill. Robotnik Winter I have up here because it's shown to be a very mountainous area with a lot of snowboarding spots, but there isn't much about in terms of industry, so I don't think it's close to Scrap Brain. Leading more cadence to the idea that this island is one of Eternal Summer is the existence of a desert. Yeah, a desert. Sonic Blast, maybe the worst Sonic game ever made, does in fact take place here. And Yellow Desert is a zone in that game. I think it's likely off to the right here, a little further up from Marble Zone, which is also incredibly hot. Maybe behind these mountains. This could also make the mountains in question the Red Volcano Zone. There's really nowhere else that could be. Again, I think it makes sense that there's likely only one of each biome on this island. So these volcanoes and these ones have to be the same. Despite its name, it's also more purple in color, so there's that connection as well. Blue Marine is an underwater ruin that looks to be more off the coast than under the island, like Labyrinth. It gives more ocean than ruin vibes, so I placed it around here, kind of near Red Volcano. Finally, Green Hill is located at, take a guess. And from Green Hill to the legally distinct Green Hills zone, we have Sonic 2 Game Gear, also taking place on South Island. Green Hills zone is located at, yes, Green Hill, shocking, I know. Underground zone is a kind of dusty looking area with lava below the ground, so I think it slides in right between Yellow Desert and Red Volcano or Marble Zone very nicely. Sky High zone has to be high up, so I put it up here to the left in the mountains around the highest point that isn't Scrap Brain zone. Aqua Lake shares some visual similarities to Labyrinth, but with a more above ground aesthetic, so I put it along the lake top up here, kind of near one of the known Labyrinth entrances. Gimmick Mountain takes place in presumably the mountains. It contains a ton of traps and technology. The game doesn't specify where these traps come from, but my immediate thought here is that this is maybe like the inner caverns of Scrap Brain. It's visually very similar. Now for some quick cleanup, we also have Iron Ruin from Sonic Drift 2. The backdrop here is very similar to Scrap Brain, so I have a feeling this track is set at the base of these mountains where Scrap Brain, or rather the remnants of it, now stand. There's the Super Labyrinth, the central location of Sonic Labyrinth. This is a massive base that Eggman builds on South Island. We can't really know where this is, but if you're going to build a big huge maze-like facility for a hedgehog to run around in, you probably do it on a lot of flat ground out in the desert, right? Anyway, since we've now covered Sonic 1 and Sonic 3, let's just move on over to West Side Island is the setting of Sonic 2, and thankfully not as many games as South Island. Let's get the easy ones out of the way. Once again, we have Sonic Origins to give us a good jumping off point. It fairly clearly lays out the locations of Emerald Hill, Casino Night, Chemical Plant, Aquag Ruin, Hilltop Zone, and Oil Ocean. Metropolis is likely very close to Oil Ocean given the level order and similar themes of industrialization. Not to mention they're both linked to Dynamite Plant, a Sonic the Fighter's arena which contains elements from both. Mystic Cave, I feel confident saying, exists under Hilltop Zone, not just because of the level order, but also the fact that the higher ground here gives Mystic Cave plenty of room to exist. This also puts Hidden Palace even further below both zones, as evidenced by the way you enter that zone from Mystic Cave. There's a couple of zones from Sonic Mania that also take place here. Studiopolis is entered right from Chemical Plant without the use of the Phantom Ruby, so we know it must take place here, and Oil Ocean is visible from Mirage Saloon, meaning it has to not only be on the same island, but in fairly close proximity to it. There's a few Sonic Drift 2 tracks that also take place here. Quake Cave is visually identical to Mystic Cave, meaning that it's probably close by, and I think Dark Valley is likely somewhere in this hilly mass at the island center, just above Quake Cave. Desert Road really has to be near Mirage Saloon since it's the only known desert area on the island, and Balloon Panic is clearly set in Emerald Hill. Emerald Ocean I think we can assume is just off the coast of Emerald Hill given the name and similar island aesthetics in the background, whilst Rainy Savannah I put on this rockier section here. This one's a bit of a wild card. I put it here because it's got a lot of visual similarities to Emerald Hill, only with a more rocky aesthetic. Finally, there's Sonic Pocket Adventure. Bro, get out of my pocket. I need my jacket back. It's cold. There's a lot of debate as to whether this one is actually even canon. Ian Flynn said that for the 30th anniversary encyclopedia, the game wasn't even allowed to be mentioned by name, so that might suggest it's not at the moment. It's kind of a no-go zone for Sega, but it's a very inoffensive game to either include or not include, so we're going to stick it on the map anyway. If it doesn't really exist, it doesn't affect too much here. More or less every zone here is directly reflective of a Sonic 2 area, and so it's my belief that this game also takes place on West Side Island, with each of these zones being in the same locations as their Sonic 2 equivalents. The only zone that might upset this theory is Neo South Island zone, which bears a resemblance to Green Hill and shares some cultural indicators like the totem poles and tiki heads. However, the level layout and enemies are taken right from Emerald Hill zone, so it's my belief that once again, Neo means new, so this area to me just implies that South Island natives moved here at some point and started populating the island with their own culture before they was maybe cut short. Or maybe this part even still is South Island territory, who knows. Right, we have a couple of weird ones to clean up the classic era with, so you like pinball? The Veg-o-Fortress, I don't know, is this massive mountain landmass in the ocean that Eggman whips up one Sunday afternoon. It's powered by 16 Chaos Emeralds. And that can't be right. This game's not canon, is it?
When does 3D Blast take place?
Sometime after Spinball.
When does Spinball take place?
Sometime after Sonic 3 and Knuckles.
Yeah, no, says right here it is, okay. My favourite thing about this is that the plot for this game doesn't even revolve around pinball beyond the fact that Eggman's just having fun with this one and said, fuck it, let's make a pinball fortress. There's characters from SatAM and the Archie comics present here. The original name of the mountain is Mount Mobius. This game definitely was not meant to be canon, but I don't know, man, it is now, okay, so I guess it goes on the map. Fortunately, as far as mapping goes, it is easy. The game sees you progressing upwards throughout the mountain, so the level order is really all you need to know. Toxic caves is at the very bottom in the mountain's underbelly, lava powerhouse is in the middle, the machine rests at the top, and the showdown takes place at the very peak. Knuckles Chaotix, apart from having the hardest box art in the series, introduces us to Newtrogic High Zone. No idea if that name has a definition. The one I found definitely fits, but it was submitted to Urban Dictionary this year, so I don't know, I don't think that's a reliable source. Anyway, once again, we do get a good overhead view of the island, so mapping out the game zones is a cakewalk. Newtrogic High Zone rose out of the water after the events of Sonic 3, and the technology here has definite ties to Angel Island. The large rings here are said to resemble those on Angel Island, and the Chaos rings found on Newtrogic High are able to summon the Master Emerald. This does imply it's also nearby, so we've put it just south of the island with Isolated Island from the game's tutorial over to the west more. Finally, I think Resort Island, Mirage Island, and Coco Island from Sonic R, Tails Adventure, and Sonic 4 respectively all exist around here. Resort Island just feels thematically at home with this group of islands, and Coco Island is described as floating just above the water in the South Ocean and being surrounded by many other small islands. Seems to fit the bill to me. Some versions of the story in this game cite Tails as having lived here before he met Sonic on West Side, while some say he visits the island after, but either way I don't think Tails would have travelled too far alone at this point in his character's arc, so probably close by. Mirage Island is the location of Sonic 4, supposedly. We only have the absolute loosest confirmation of this in the form of the social media manager at the time, basically making up a name for it because Sonic Team didn't fucking bother. It apparently takes the form of familiar places, which is a not so clever excuse for all the rehashed designs in this game, but it likely floats around this area as the little planet is once again focal to the plot here. If our placements are correct, then Sonic hasn't had a ton of adventures in his version of Africa, but there's a few we can nail down here. This landmass down here is likely the continent of Africa, which contains Missouri on Sonic's planet, a parallel to somewhere like Mali in real life. Mirage Road from Rush is pretty heavily inspired by the Egyptian pyramids. I think it's safe to say it belongs here, just like Sand Ruins from Riders, which would also put Babylon Garden close by. Regal Ruin from Sonic R is another desert ruins-like area. The instruction book literally cites this as ancient Egyptian remains, so we can definitely put that here, I think, slightly off the coast given the abundance of water. Now, we gotta talk about the Sand Ocean region from Sonic Adventure 2. This entire region is assumed to be in the United Federation, but I'm not so convinced that's the case. Again, I don't think the in-game map is solid enough evidence for me here, given the fact that the Ark is also visible, which obviously that's not really that close to Earth, and also there is just so much overwhelming evidence that this place is in Egypt. All of the stages in this region feature heavy Egyptian imagery from Horus-like statues, hieroglyphics, and a bust that resembles a pharaoh. The bust also seems to be an existing part of the region and not an Eggman invention, given that it turns on him once Sonic defeats the control mechanism. It's also fairly unlike Eggman to build his robots out of stone. The pyramids in the area also appear to very much be Egyptian in design, as well as presumably serving a similar purpose to real-life pyramids, that being that they're tombs, as indicated by all the damn spirits and ghosts hanging around. The only evidence any of this takes place in the United Federation is the presence of gun forces and flags which have been replaced by Eggman ones by the time SA2 takes place. But anyway, American military bases in Africa is very much a thing in real life, and given that this base was seemingly created as a sort of launch station and control center for the Ark operations, as evidenced by the teleporter and the huge fucking rocket inside of the pyramid, it makes sense that the United Federation might choose to set this up in the middle of a desert of a foreign land rather than on home soil. The more remote and secretive, the better. And I do think the rocket is a Federation one. This is way too sensible to be an Eggman design. Finally, we have Magma Rift on this small island here. The music track contains elements of Sand Ruins theme suggesting a connection, and Africa is home to a number of volcanoes, so this doesn't feel out of place to me. So there's two main games in this franchise that give us a good look at Sonic's Europe, and that is Sonic 06 and Sonic Unleashed. Spagonia is very much Italy. There are some minor influence from other European countries here as well, but the red roofs are very reminiscent of cities like Florence and Bologna. There's also the massive aqueducts, architecture associated with Rome, and distant mountains in the background. Metropolis Speedway from Freeriders could also take place here. The city somewhat resembles Spagonia, and we know from Team Sonic Racing that Spagonia certainly is home to some futuristic tech like sky roads, and is absolutely down to use them for racing in Grand Prix. Just below Spagonia, I believe we also have the island city of Soliana, also home to Kingdom Valley and the Soliana Forest. Soliana is very obviously a Dennis stand-in, so I think it stands to reason it would be around here somewhere. It's said that the Dusty Desert is nearby, but maybe not immediately nearby. It's accessed via a warp gate from the city, and it has no clear entryway like Wave Ocean or Kingdom Valley that feels thematically appropriate. This is another case of it's a video game where we have to pretend this type of desert exists in a European continent, which, hey, maybe it does. Sonic's planet is not ours, after all, and European deserts are absolutely a real thing, they just normally don't look like this one. Apatos is of course a stand-in for Greece, or at least Santorini, which is visually identical. It's coastal, so likely around here. Blue Coast and Water Palace also likely exist nearby. They're visually identical to one another. White Acropolis from Sonic 06 we also think takes place in some sort of Greek mountain range, maybe the Sonic stand-in for Mount Olympus. Obviously, Acropolis has super Greek connotations, and the base is accessed from a teleporter in Soliana, so it really could be anywhere on the planet. It's worth pointing out that Gun do appear to be operating both here and in Soliana, but given that it only seems to be Shadow Rouge and like this one other guy, I get the impression that this mission is mostly off the books and probably Black Ops. Shadow and Rouge weren't even told they'd be working together on the break-in, and Shadow sort of tries to approach this stealthily. I don't think Gun is allowed to be operating here, technically speaking. Out in the middle of the ocean between Europe and Africa, we have the Starfall Islands from Frontiers. There's not really a perfect place to put these, they're very remote. They're pretty damn small though, you can run across the full length in-game and it's not that large. We put them here because A, the ancients do eventually migrate to South Federation territory and begin evolving into Chao, so they're probably relatively close by, and B, the islands are all named after Greek gods, so we assume they're pretty close to Greece. Maybe Greek explorers named them, or maybe the ancients actually were the gods that Greek mythology refers to on this planet. Russia, we think, might be a very different place in the Sonic world, and that's because there is a pretty weird consistency with toy and entertainment themes and Russian architecture. Casino Paradise, Toy Kingdom, and Circus Park all contain Russia-inspired castles and buildings. Not to mention this official art for Toy Kingdom shows it somewhere that sees heavy snowfall, so I don't know, think there's something to this. Holoska is a region that is basically just ice with a very small population, likely a stand-in for places like Alaska, Greenland, the Arctic, and Antarctica. We think it works pretty well on this isolated piece of land up here as Sonic's ice continent, if you will. There isn't really multiple poles on this planet like ours, so I think just having one like Arctic area makes sense. The only other location we can really place here is the Aurora Icefield from Sonic the Fighters, based on the fact Bark the polar bear lives here and the northern lights are visible. I also think Eggman Land from Unleashed might be near here. Not that the Unleashed map is at all reliable, but Eggman Land is kinda near Holoska, so maybe this is it. This one's mostly guesswork, to be honest. Asia's up next. We've got Chang'an, that's China, obviously. There's fireworks, a big wall, you know, all the essentials if you're doing a China level in a video game. The Geigen rocks from Sonic Rider Zero Gravity definitely have East Asian inspirations with these Chinese pagoda temples up in the peak, so probably puts them in the mountains up here somewhere. This is also likely where the Twinkle Snow and Ice Mountain ranges are. It's difficult to pin down specific parallels since both are fairly generic snow levels, but East Asia is home to many snowy mountain tops, and Mohe in China is a particularly great viewing spot for the Northern Lights, which just so happen to be prominent in the background of Twinkle Snow. Ice Mountain, on the other hand, was put here because it shares a name with the Team Sonic racing track, said to be in a sub-region known as Glacier Land. Given the abundance of water in Ice Mountain, we think there's some coastal mountain range here that drifts into Holoska territory, as Ice Mountain in Team Sonic Racing has a music track which incorporates Cool Edge from Unleashed, suggesting that there's a connection between the two. Frozen Forest from Free Riders fits pretty well in here too. China is one of the few places in which you're most likely to discover both dinosaur fossils and natural crystals, which this track has both of. Press Garden from Mania likely exists in around the Japan area. The area is directly inspired by the industrialization under the Meiji Shrine in Shibuya, Tokyo, and all of the cherry blossoms and ancient Japanese architecture speak for themselves. The boss is also a ninja, just to be even more on the nose. Seaside Hill, we feel, is around here somewhere as well. The temples and ruins look fairly Japanese to us in inspiration, although admittedly I couldn't find anything confirming that, so that's just the opinion of like two white people, so I mean that could be wrong. Although it should be noted, turtles have a fair amount of significance in Japanese culture. One of the things they symbolize being luck and support, which they certainly help you out in this stage, so you know, it kind of works. Dolphin Resort we pinned down as being somewhat parallel to Dubai maybe. Another one that's fairly difficult to pinpoint because it's fairly generic, but this felt pretty close to us. Finally, there's Shamar and Adabat. Shamar is very much inspired by Middle Eastern countries like Iraq, Iran, Jordan, or Petra, whilst Adabat is rooted in culture from South Asian countries like Indonesia, Thailand, and Cambodia. Oh, and then there's the North Star Islands from Sonic Superstars. I believe these sit somewhere between Africa and Asia. The islands themselves are in the middle of the ocean, but they are home to a clan of Sungazer lizards who protect the Black Onyx, a dragon egg that is sealed on the islands. Sungazers are native to Africa in real life, meaning that they can't be too far from here, and the North Star does have some significance in Chinese culture. I'm not going to spend too long here, don't worry, just smashing through this one quick since it doesn't really fit in anywhere else. This one's a bit of a spare part, just as its game is in the eyes of most fans, honestly. The Lost Hex has appeared in exactly one Sonic game, Lost World. It is a floating planet similar to that of the Little Planet, although it seems to be a bit more elusive and is home to the Zeti, these fuckers. No one likes them, but Sonic Team keep trying to make them a thing for some reason. This one's kind of weird, but we do have a pretty big overview shot of the Lost Hex, which lays out enough different coloured hex tiles to give us a rough idea of where things are. I think these islands down here are tropical coasts. They have a shoreline with some grassy terrain unlike these up here, and we do traverse a fair amount of grassland in this zone. This lava area is definitely Lava Mountain, and this snowy section is probably Frozen Factory. There's two sandy areas shown here, but this one is more likely to be desert ruins in my opinion. The shade of the sand matches way better. I think this grassy area to the left is Windy Hill, whilst the one to the far right top is Sky Road. Both are super similar aesthetically, but this one has more clouds and is also closer to Lava Mountain. In this area, which I assume is Silent Forest, which does group it with the game's later zones. This isn't super important on its own, but I think combined with the cloud thing is enough to convince me. And with that, we have mapped out Sonic's entire planet. Jesus Christ. Once again, if I didn't mention somewhere, I assure you it was thought about. It was just decided that it did not need mapping. Not every stage is being mapped here. Once more, just every location and plenty of stages in this franchise take place in the same areas. Dream realms and off-planet areas do not count as mapping out Sonic's planet, so all of the stuff from colors like Planet Wisp and Sweet Mountain, you know, they don't belong on this map. They're just up in space floating around somewhere. The Little Planet and Lost Hex only made the cut because they're kind of micro planets, you know, they're not like full astral bodies. Not because I like Zabak or anything, that guy's a fuck. That being said, this map isn't correct. It's not canon. There is no right answer here. So let me know what you think and what you do differently in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, please do subscribe. Thank you so much again for 10,000 subscribers, and take care, everyone.